in the Louisville Metro conference room. We are just getting ready to start our consult party meeting number 4 for the Beecher Terrace project. We're still scrolling through screens here. But for those of you that have dialed into the WebEx, are you able to see the screen right now? You should see a mix of the main screen and the agenda in the background. Can you see that?
And I'll stop sharing.
I don't see it.
I don't. Okay, thank you.
Am I coming through now?
We think we have not shared.
All right.
Woohoo!
I see it now.
Could you 1 second go back to that other screen?
Which screen?
It showed all the number of people that had dialed into the meeting.
Okay, you're asking a lot, Senator.
I know. All right, wait, we'll forget it.
That little blue thing at the top.
Oh, yeah. Right. I'm going to say. So that.
Oh, you have to stop.
There you
No,
go, right there.
There we go.
Oh, look at that.
We're all together.
We are all learning together.
Yeah.
Oh, we'll color 5 though.
Oh.
No, they're further up in the list. Okay.
All right, that's okay. We're not going to tempt fate too much by. Okay. So as we said, we had another meeting a little earlier today, and as I just noted, we will master WebEx technology as a result of these, and we hope to use. One of the things we will specifically seek at the end is your feedback on this this sharing mechanism and whether or not folks liked it and felt engaged in the meeting. But I will start here by saying welcome to the consulting party meeting number 4 for the Beecher Terrace redevelopment project. I'm Cindy Miller, and I'm working with Metro on the Section 106 consulting party process. And with that very brief introduction, I will kick the welcome and introduction to Gina Dunlap from Louisville Metro.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for dialing in or coming in today to be with us. We are here to talk about Vision Russell and historic assets related to this enormous redevelopment project. I'm the Director of Redevelopment Strategies. I spend most of my time working on Beecher Terrace and Greater Russell issues. I'm so really glad to have you here. A couple of house rules that we'd like to cover. The people in the room physically are going to do their best to not type too fiercely or let their vibrating phones create background noise. We do ask that the people calling in remotely do the same with regard to muting themselves, again, to cut down on any background noise. We will probably not utilize the chat feature, but if you have questions during any of the presentation, you're more than welcome to unmute yourself and go ahead and just, ask the question that you need to ask. Any other housekeeping, I think? We are recording. This is a live recorded session. We are documenting both the audio portion of the meeting and the video. So at some point in a future date, we do hope to make the recording available for anyone that was unable to participate with us, or even for us as future reference, come back to the discussion that we had here today. So
we are ready for introductions.
I'm Gina Dunlap, Louisville Metro Government.
Nick LaQuente, I'm the Site Protection Program Manager for the Kentucky Heritage Council.
Chris, I'm Archaeological Coordinator at the Kentucky Heritage Council.
Farrell, I'm the Environmental Review Coordinator at the Kentucky Heritage Council.
Mike Van Em, Kentucky Heritage Council.
Curtis Hopper, Assistant Director of the Louisville Metro Office of Housing and Community Development.
Senior Preservation Officer at Louisville Metro. Gretchen, I'm the Director of Advanced Planning for Louisville Metro.
Andrew Miller, and I'm working with Metro on consulting parties. Can we go to the folks on the phone, please?
Advisory Council on Historic Preservation.
I'm in archaeology. I'm the architectural historian.
Billy Kinahan, I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Urban and Public Affairs at the University of Louisville.
Cliff, Louisville Metro Government.
Do we have Chloe on the line?
She's on mute.
Looks like she's muted.
No.
Muted.
Chloe, you're muted, so if you have something that you need to come in later, but we can see that you're there.
You're accounted for.
And caller number 5. Please.
That might be Mark.
That might be Mark. He wasn't. Can you pull it down, Gina?
No.
So we can, you
wait a
can?
minute, there we go.
Yeah.
There we go.
There we go. Caller number 5 and 6.
Right.
One of those is Mark.
I thought he was 6.
One of those, I think, Miss Tanya is showing.
Weird it does that. And we saw it do that.
Did, yes. So if there's anybody else out there, we will ask later, again, to take a later roll call in case any folks join us a little bit later. But, okay.
Real quick, I'll just run through the agenda and then we'll dive into the presentation. So we are going to recap previous meetings 1 and 2, give an explanation of the status of Section 106 review process, talk about project effects, direct and indirect effects, talk about the project timeline and timeline for the programmatic agreement and the next steps involved with that, touch upon future meetings and modes of communication, leave lots of room for questions and discussion, and then try to conclude before 8 p.m. this evening.
Fantastic. Thank you. Yeah, so let's dive into the presentation. So, for the next slide. Slide.
All right. So project overview. We have 5 major principles or objectives that we're trying to accomplish through the Visual Choice Neighborhood Initiative. One is to increase connectivity. Connectivity in all its forms. So from the street pattern, for safety for pedestrians, bike facilities, all types of modes of transportation, public transit, but also from a humanistic perspective, thinking about digital connectivity and making sure that internet access is both available and affordable on the site. We have goals related to creating retail and service centers on the site that's desperately missing from the Russell neighborhood and other parts of West Louisville. We have to expand recreational, educational, and cultural resources throughout the neighborhood, as well as improve health and, of course, preserve and develop housing. During the planning process, we divided our staff, nonprofit partners, and neighborhood stakeholders into 4 major groups. One dealing with people, which is a bit of a departure from previous Hope 6 undertakings, which focuses more on the built environment. This neighborhood strives to be extremely comprehensive about improving the quality of life through opportunities for people and changes to the built environment. So we have a very heavy focus on housing because this is a HUD-sorted endeavor. We're also partnered with the Jefferson County Public School System and adopted Roosevelt Perry Elementary School as our choice initiative school, working with Ms. Diane Porter, who's the president of the school board, and Jonathan Lowe, who works in strategic policy for the school district. And then we have a neighborhood focus. Beecher Terrace is about 15 blocks in a much larger neighborhood context. So there are both elements that address on-site as well as the balance of what I call Greater Russell neighborhood that we're focusing on through this initiative. Any ends about any of that? All right.
All right.
Or you want the
Yeah, let's do a keyboard. Keyboard. So a minute now and review first the first 2 consulting parties meetings. Many of you guys, and I think just about everybody was at either one or the other of those meetings. First meeting was heavily focused on what is the consulting parties process, what is the Section 106 process, and how do the consulting parties interact. And that meeting was back in December. And second consulting parties meeting, which we had in January, focused on a conversation about the effects of the project, an initial glance at what those project effects were. And then there was a very lively conversation. A significant period of the second meeting was devoted to a preliminary look at some mitigation options of how to mitigate adverse effects associated with the project. Sort of in a nutshell, that's what those two meetings were about. If you would like to see the slide deck, the notes, and part of the video, I think the video is up too from meeting. They are all on the Vision Russell website. It's publicly accessible. And if you have any questions about the content from those meetings, feel free to ask me or Cynthia, and we could be happy to fill you in on what happened at those meetings. So this slide where we are now brings us up to speed on where we are in the status of the Section 106 process associated with the Beecher Terrace project. First step, which is consultation, you'll see when we talk about the project timeline. The consultation process and the process of talking with and working with the consulting parties is ongoing throughout the life of the project now. That consultation will go all the way to the end of construction for the Beecher Terrace project. Second step, which is the identification and evaluation of historic properties. So that took place last year, mostly in 2007. There were both 2017. Thank you, Gretchen.
For the record.
I'm an archaeologist. I look way back. There are both above ground, so architectural historic properties associated with this project, as well as below ground or archaeological historic properties associated with the project. We'll show a slide of where those properties are in just a minute. The third step, which is the assessment of the effects of the project on those historic properties, is something that we'll spend some time talking about today, and what those actual effects are, and how we've come to the conclusion about those effects. Last step is how do you resolve those adverse effects? About a week and a half ago, the Louisville Metro circulated out a programmatic agreement, a draft of the programmatic agreement that we hope to use to resolve those adverse effects, and we'll spend quite a bit of time today will be devoted to fielding questions about the programmatic agreement and talking about that. The formal comment period for that for comments on the programmatic agreement ends next Friday. The date is escaping me right now, but I think it's the 6th. It's the 6th, which is next Friday. So that is where we are in the Section 106 process. Anybody have any questions so far? Questions or comments? Yeah. Well, I'm just going to spend a minute here. So for those of you that were at the archaeology meeting, which was actually consulting parties meeting number 3, and that took place about 2 or 3 hours ago now, we didn't spend much time talking about the assessment of effects. We spent a lot of time talking about the archaeological resources. So in the Section 106 process, the assessment of effects is very important. After you've identified the historic properties that are in the project area, you have to look at whether or not the project will have an effect on those historic properties, and if it does have an effect, what kind of effect will it have? Will it have an adverse effect, or will it have no effect? And we talked about this. We went through this in the first consulting parties meeting, but this is just a quick review. You determine that your project has an adverse effect, and I think I mentioned at the beginning, right now that the project has an adverse effect. We are looking down the Beecher Terrace housing project. That's a direct adverse effect on that resource. So the project begins right now by saying we have that adverse effect. Examples of adverse effects occur, and I'm not going to read, you can read through what these characteristics are, but most importantly for this current conversation, there is a direct adverse effect. We will be destroying that historic property that's right there in the middle of the project area. So this is a map that shows the historic properties that were identified during the identification phase of the project. They're both above ground and below ground resources. The below ground resources are two archaeological sites, the Beecher Terrace site and the Baxter Square site, and they're both shown. The Square site is easy to see on the map. The Beecher Terrace site is actually pretty much the entire white rectangle that you see around the project area. In addition to those archaeological sites, there are a number of above ground resources that are also part of the project. So in the big square itself is the Baxter Community Center. That is part of the I'm pointing at it, but that's not that effective. It's not effective for those of you that aren't here. So the Baxter Community Center, which is right in the middle of the project area, Church of the Merciful Savior, which is on the in the southern part of the project area, St. Peter's German Evangelical Church, which is, I'll questions in a second, which is on the northern part of the project area. The architectural resource, the biggest above resource associated with the project is the Beecher Terrace complex itself. And that's the 59 buildings that are right there that represent the Beecher Terrace neighborhood, or Beecher Terrace project area. Does anybody know about the resources that were identified in the project area so far? All right. The historic district includes both all of the public residential units that are associated with Beecher Terrace as well as the Baxter Community Center. Also included in the Beecher Terrace Historic District is actually Baxter Park itself. That's one big contiguous historic district. Now, 3 or 4 times, but I'll say it one more time. Direct adverse effect on the Beecher Terrace site itself. For stage 1 of the project, there is actually no direct effect on the Baxter Square Park. And I talked about what the potential effects were on St. Peter's United Church of Christ and on Church of the Merciful Savior, which is shown here. As these areas are contiguous, so it's on the southern side of the project area, the other is in the northern corner of the project area. And through a conversation and through input from others, Metro government now feels that this first stage of the project will have no indirect effect on those 2 properties. Does anybody have so far? We're going to shift gears just a little bit and talk about what the project effects are and what exactly stage 1 of the project will look like. So I'm going to take a minute to pause if anybody has questions about the specific resources so far. All right, so I think this is where I let Gretchen take over a little bit, or do you want me to?
Sure.
All right.
Talk a bit about phase 1 of the project.
Yep.
Okay, phase 1 you can see on the site plan. It's got the blue rectangle around it and says phase 1. That building is what we're calling the Lifelong Wellness Building. It's 4 stories high. It will have 117 units for seniors that are 55 years or above. also hold the management offices for the entire site. So as the site gets developed, the management offices and the sort of community room and all that sort of stuff will be on the western part of this building. The site itself will also have additional amenities. It will have outdoor seating and places to interact. It will have common rooms. It will have a hair salon. It will have rooms inside for doctor's visits. It will have laundry rooms, all the kind of amenities that you see in, modern residential units today. And so that is phase one as you see it. The site plan itself, which we'll probably get to maybe on the next site, it just looks a lot different than it does today. So we might want to go on to the next.
Yeah, but that's the basics for that.
Right.
Also included as part of stage one of the project is the demolition of the existing 59 buildings associated with Beecher Terrace, and so here's a slide that shows that. The demolition takes place in 3 different phases. The blue part is the first phase, northeast side of the project area. The yellow area, central, is the second phase of demolition, and then the third phase of demolition will happen over on the side of the project area. And again, that's all associated with stage one of the project. The same building and a slightly different configuration. There'll be a bunch more slides that show a little bit more detail. So since Gretchen already described this, we'll keep going. So you want to tell a little bit about what the building is like?
So to give you an idea, the phase building has come quite a bit longer in its development, and we've worked very closely with the architects into how that building might look and interact with the neighborhood and have sort of the characteristics of the historic neighborhood, but also indicate kind of a modern, a building that's being built in 2018. So we've collected a number of different inspirational photos or things help inform this dialogue that we've been having with the developers and the architects. And these are some of the buildings. As you see, we're referencing the historic brick, but be in a new color or a new way of applying it onto the facade. We've played a lot with the windows. As we know, this area of Russell has a lot of Italianates. It has a lot of his historic buildings where you see generally much larger windows than you do today. So we've been playing the idea, as you see in this photo, and the first 2 photos to the left, can kind of indicate a larger opening into the building, even though you've got smaller than what you'd see in your historic buildings. So that's the details that we've worked with, along with a number of others. In terms of materials, there will be some paneling, and these are kind of plays on things we've looked at, bringing in kind of a wood or a warmer feel, or this kind of coppery tone that would also kind of reference something of the past, but also the paint itself as a material that you wouldn't find in historic buildings, but you see in a lot of architecture today. Are elevations of the lifelong wellness building and suggestions for facade materials. So what we can kind of go back and forth between these, but basically this is your material palette. The top upper left-hand corner, you'll see 2 examples of brick. We have recommended the second one to the architects. Choose that brick alternative, the Glen Gary stone. Felt that was a nicer look to it, and it has some kind of variation in that every single brick is exactly the same color. So we want to have it too monotone. We wanted to give it some look to the building. The corner siding, the number B, which is going to be kind of, if you want to go, back to the, so Gina, go down to the last elevation there. That corner piece is on what will become Liberty Street and on street. So that's kind of a corner element. It's going to have a lot of glazing, but it's also going to have that paneling on the corner to really sort of give that a strong corner presence as it's 9th and Liberty. And that paneling, what we've shown is that we can go back to the material, that copper wire gives it kind of a nice warm tone. The yellow above that will show you that there will be some sort of, as the light hits it, some kind of qualities that will come out. Again, it won't feel like it's all monotone. There's some wood features you see in number C, and a couple different sidings have been introduced, everything from kind of a colder white to a warmer white to a harvest yellow and to a darker gray, medium gray, you would say. We go back to the thing. If you look at the pieces to kind of give it a little bit of a punch here and there, you'll see those come about in smaller. Up and it's over by F. If you look there, those are the yellow siding, that kind of harvest color that you do see quite a bit of in the city. The lower facade, kind of beige facade, as you see number M, or no, what it would be number E. The second line. I'll here. So this is kind of a warmer grays, and then we've got the lighter white, and this large gray being that brick. Of and then
yeah, come talk next to the phone, please.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I've gone up to point on this very intricate. And the other material that kind of really pulls it all together, and go back to the materials again, that darker panel that's used as kind of an accent color, and right there, H and I, that really kind of helps ground the whole, pulling these. The other colors are very kind of similar, similar tones, and so it's nice to have a darker tone to kind of help just draw together. Are you? Oh, okay. As you can hear, Denara playing tag here.
I know. Don't worry,
Okay.
we're going to have this down in 2 meetings. So.
Okay. There's some other paneling you'll see in K, L, and M at the bottom here. Those also appear back on. Oh,
hey, you got it.
As this thing, so this is all going to be online, and so you will be able to kind of go back and forth and which color is which and what materials these are. Yep. Here you see without all the number indicating, but this gives you kind of an idea of that composition you will be seeing with these different materials and colors.
Keep going.
The other element that is being introduced is we are introducing 3 new streets in the neighborhood. Currently, the site does not have any east-west roads that go through streets that go through the neighborhood. And so the largest one will be Liberty. That will be kind of the main street. We will be extending Liberty, which exists on the east, and extending it all the way to 13th, where it will dead end at the Porter Paint site. So this will additional connectivity to the neighborhood. It will also help recreate the old street grid that you see in the rest of the Russell neighborhood. It's been more of a super block for the last 7-odd years. And so this is a cross-section of what that will look like. We use the complete guide, the sort of the NACDO guides, all that kind of stuff in terms of, what size sidewalks you have. We'll be having 10-foot lanes with parking on one side, you can see here. And this will allow going to be neighborhood streets. This is not a throughway. People are not going to be speeding through this. One, because it ends at 13th, and 2, because of the dimensions that we've put into the streetway here, with having on-street parking as well as more narrow throughway. We have ample 6-foot sidewalks on either side, wind strip, breaking that up from the road, giving it a bit of a buffer, and then we've got a bit of area there before houses start, about 12 feet. And this is to give it that sort of urban feel. This is what you see, again, a lot in the neighborhood. You have, this is a kind of a traditional setback. You'll see a lot of homes. Some of them more setback, some of them are closer up to the street. So this is something kind of in between. Gives people a little bit of a front stoop to sit out on, activates the streetscape, and gives it planting room as well. Next slide is the two smaller streets, and these go down to about 9 feet with a parking strip. These are going to feel very uncomfortable to drive fast on. You'll probably see people doing about 20 miles an hour. These are considered, and you're really only going to be driving on these streets if you live on this street. So these are neighborhood streets. You know, you probably have kids riding their bike on them, you know, crossing, you know, here, whatever. So these are more for access and to, you know, facilitate the neighborhood connectivity within the neighborhood as opposed to connectivity. Liberty is more connecting it with the rest of the neighborhood, and this is more connecting within the neighborhood. Of the new block configuration, and so as you see, instead of having 4 major blocks that really kind of ran north to south, we've those up with the new Liberty Street, the Liberty Court, and the Fisk Court, and so we've gone from 4 to 16 blocks. You want to talk, Tom?
Does anybody have any questions for Gretchen about any of those design elements that she just ran through?
Any other comments through the website or any other way on phase 1 design?
For the comments, they're up on the website.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Oh, like I say, Betsy Hatfield had she called me yesterday and we talked about the color palette and the phase 1. I think she's going to be on this call tonight, but she's not here right now. She seemed to be, after we talked, she kind of understood what was going on with it, so she was really happy with the color palette.
Do you remember what Darnell's specific comments were by any chance?
Comments are more about the breakup of the site. His comments were more about the park, Walnut Park, and that is being decommissioned as opposed to the actual building facades and materials.
We spoke about that a lot in the, Darnell was at the last meeting, and we spoke about that, I said, quite a bit.
Specifically Walnut Park rather than the actual design of the new construction. Okay. Good to know.
Any other comments on the design elements? Well, we'll talk about the project timeline. So as you can see here, what we're trying to show is what we in stage 1 versus we will have in later phases of the project. We received some comments back already on the programmatic agreement that the definition of stage 1 was a little bit unclear. So we're trying to clear a few things up here. So that stage 1 part of the project includes the easy things to include are demolitions of phase 1, 2, and 3. So we showed a slide for that before, and relocation of tenants, phase 1, 2, and 3. It will also include, obviously, phases 1, 2, and 3 of the Section 106 compliance process. We're doing it now. Though as you see, that compliance process then extends out to the end of the project, well past this first known stage. For the construction of the project, stage 1 includes only phase 1 of the construction. We will show a little bit of phase 2, those of you that are here today, but what we call stage 1 in the programmatic agreement ends with phase 1 of the construction. So it's everything that Gretchen pretty much just walked you through right here. That represents stage 1. That's the overall timeline as it relates to all of the bigger project elements. one of the things that we did want to introduce too was the timeline that we had for completing the programmatic agreement and the compliance documents associated with the project. It is the goal of the project to have a signed programmatic agreement by 30th, which means we will hope to circulate the document for signature on April 30th, because we think it probably will take about 30 days to collect signatures. That means that comment period, as I mentioned before, for the programmatic agreement ends April 6th. I see it now here in my notes. And we will take about a week to turn around the comments that we receive. Vision that period there in early to mid-April as being a time when we will be communicating back and forth in a very lively manner with all of the consulting parties about comments that you may have had, so that we can circulate out the revised programmatic agreement in a timely fashion. In addition to the programmatic agreement, running concurrently is a letter of reconciliation and the mitigation plans associated with mitigating the adverse effects to the project. We have a teeny more time to execute those letters of reconciliation, but the project is on a very aggressive schedule. So we hope to have all of the letters of reconciliation for stage one. So the stage one letter of reconciliation finalized by June 15th. The timelines proposed in the programmatic agreement are in order for that letter, that first letter of reconciliation, because we're working on that compressed schedule. So hope actually to circulate that out for signature by May 30th. So just a 2-week period to get all those signatures. But again, that means that in the intervening period, a lot of work to be done to detail out those mitigation measures. We had a great jump on all of that from these consulting parties meetings that we've put together. There will be 2 other meetings that we're looking at. April 10th is a date that we have targeted to have a workshop type meeting to hammer out elements of the archaeological data recovery plan. That plan has been circulated to the consulting parties that have expressed a technical interest in the archaeological elements of the project. And anybody who would like to attend that technical conversation about the archaeological data recovery is welcome in the April 10th meeting. And again, you'll receive a formal invitation to that. And then a final meeting to talk about mission for the above ground elements of the project on April 12th. Is that what we identified, Gina? April 12th? Yeah, and that date is based on circulating out some additional materials to all of the consulting parties. What we hope to do actually in that April 12th is to provide some additional information about the phase 2 of construction. So we'll talk about phase 2 of construction, and then we'll talk about mitigation of adverse effects for stage 1. So we'll fix our phases there just a little bit, but we'll do our best to keep it all straight. So that's the goal of those up and coming meetings. So, and I don't have a slide for that, but I promise that we'll write that out for all of you so you can see it. Yes. Questions about that timeline? All right, I'll take a minute to review some highlights of the programmatic agreement. And could you go for one more? Okay. Okay. So the programmatic agreement was circulated out now about 10 days ago. And why did we need a programmatic agreement for the project? Well, MHA has determined that the project will have an effect on historic properties and will indeed have an adverse effect on historic properties. And we need a way to manage the Section 106 process moving forward. So since we know we're going to have an adverse effect on historic properties, we need to talk about how we plan to mitigate those effects. So we choose the instrument of programmatic agreement versus memorandum agreement. I've been asked this question several different times. project itself includes many phases. It's a multi-phased construction project. We do know all of the effects on historic properties that are associated with the later phases of the project because we don't know what the later phases of the project look like yet. We can't propose to mitigate effects that we don't know what they are. Therefore, the programmatic agreement is intended to set up a process that Louisville Metro government can use Section 106 process moving forward. That's the reason that this instrument of programmatic agreement was chosen versus a memorandum of agreement for the project. I set out the programmatic agreement a few weeks ago. I'm not going to go through all the different parts of it here. We can spend the rest of a significant portion talking about it and the different parts of it. Some of the highlights are that basically it distinguishes the first stage of the project. So we've spent a lot of time now talking about what that first stage looks like. It distinguishes that first stage of the project from later stages of the project. And goals that we have as the Metro for project is to compress the timelines for comment so that developers can really maximize the input that they're getting from consulting parties. One of the concerns that developers have had in the project is that when they stretch out that comment period over a long period of time, they've moved on in their architectural design and in the process of designing. And so we need to find a way so that can capture all of the comments that consulting parties have and front load that to the greatest extent possible so that information can actually be used by developers in their design process. So it's really the intent of the compressed timelines and the compressed review periods. What I'm very productive to hear back from all the consulting parties is with those compressed timelines is something that's just excruciatingly difficult for you as consulting parties to live with, and what are some ways that we can all work together to make sure that we can maximize that input. Obviously, a lot of other elements covered in the programmatic agreement, but those were the ones that I really want to highlight with regard to what the objectives that Metro had putting together that programmatic agreement. So we will now take a pause in the slideshow and stay here. I know some people had questions or comments about the programmatic agreement that they wanted to express, and this is the opportunity to do so. Questions and comments about the programmatic agreement.
Just wanted to make sure I understood. You had mentioned April 30th to be I just want to be clear. Is that the date that you'd like to start circulating the PA signature?
Notes here. Hang on a minute. That is the date we would like to circulate the PA for signature, April 30th. And I'm sorry, who was that? It was correct.
Well, this is Gina Dunlap. I guess as a lay person, and certainly not an expert in from architecture to archaeology, I'm coming from a very practical perspective in terms of keeping the redevelopment project on schedule. We are considerably behind, and that has a lot of other implications. Thinking is, by defining stage one and really being comfortable with everything we do know at this point, and especially hearing that we don't really see any negative, indirect effects for at least the first phase of construction, we're going to be working on future phases of construction. Like I say, we're already sort of trying to cite and pin down our approach to phase two. According to the development team, phase three by virtue of its financing mechanism, is going to be coming up rapidly behind phase 2. We don't have a comprehensive master site plan, but we are pushing to get there through public engagement and having charrettes and discussions like, about what we want to see on the site and think about the practical constraints and limitations to what we have to work with. So inevitably, we are trying to get to a definitive master site plan. We just don't know how long it's going to take us to get there. But with everyone's input, having that document that gets everybody on the same page will do some of the fragmentation and sort of incremental nature by which we've been, progressing at this point, which will be a time saver in itself. The other thing I'd like to touch on is, I've been learning a lot about how a large organization like McCormick, Barron, Salazar, how they do business in 2018. And so we've been learning and getting exposed and managing expectations. We're starting to work the kinks at our communication challenges. To this point, in terms of getting best value from the input, the earlier on that we have input from everyone involved, the it makes for, there's a concept stage, there's the design stage, and then there's the technical drawing or construction drawing stage. So we spend a lot of time on concept before this ever gets to the project architect. And so I believe that that's really the critical moment, to pull in our advisors so that, you're a part of the discussion and the process early on before it even hits the architect's desk. So, we've typically spent, on phase 1, we spent a lot of time on concept. Again, that was the first phase out, and it was a learning process, and I think we've gotten more efficient about it. But it doesn't cut that process and that deliberation down. I think we probably spent, 30 days over, several meetings over maybe a 30-day, longer period, talking about phase 2. And that provides input for people who are not architects, like myself, to just react and understand. The designers is actually Urban Design Associates. They have the ability to put the puzzle pieces together from, the cost of construction, the financing mechanism, the number of units that need to be built from any particular phase, because each phase is a financial deal unto itself. We will have, at least 6 different closings for every set of construction, right? So one is one building, phase 2 is multiple buildings, but the deal is around the phase. And so depending on whether we're getting that funding from the FHA or getting it from Kentucky Housing Corporation, whether we're using tax-exempt bonds versus low-income housing tax credits, all of those factors play into the timeline that we have to meet in order just to apply for financing. But UDA is so well versed at this, they understand how to balance design elements, functionality, practicality, and finance. So what we're suggesting is that, that representatives from the State Historic Preservation Office join us in those discussions at the set of the phase we're discussing. We do that remotely. So the design and the team are in St. Louis. Use platforms like the one we're using right now to show visually and talk and mock things up. And at least in phase 2, the development team has been quite responsive, would say. So, Gretchen? Mm-hmm. They've been quite responsive. So, again, I think that's where the value of the input comes. And certainly it's a reiterative process, but we've been very pleased at the progress we've made just dealing internally with the development team on phase 2 and being responsive to the input and, the concerns and ideas that go into that. Do you want to say anything more about that?
No, I agree with Gina. I think these have been very positive encounters. I think we've done a lot of the hard work. I think working with the developers and this design team, they have a bit of a, how they do things, and we have come in and been very clear about this has got to be something that merges, neighborhood and the church. We have stood up, we've given them inspirational pictures, pictures from the neighborhood, in from residents, all this kind of stuff. So it doesn't become sort of a cookie cut site where, we're just doing, we did that block, now we're going to go and do the next one, and just copy it. So I think that this has been a bit of a process. I think they get it now, loud and clear. And so they also know that, next stage 3 is going to be a whole nother discussion, and who knows what we'll come up with. I think and what we're going to have as a product is going to be, in culture and look, and it's, of course, it's going to have a similarity. It's all built in the same time frame, but we're doing our best to make sure that we are not just replicating 2 houses and that's just cha-chong. And so, at the same time, I think the next stage will be easier because we're already kind of onto the same, with this kind of thinking.
Getting people from the preparation office involved with the design team. Is there opportunity for different consulting parties to also chime in? You mentioned Betsy had come out like question about color palette or whatever. I mean, are there other opportunities for somebody to be like, well, I like these inspirational photos better than these or whatever? I mean, this is my turn to be the layman because when you're talking about design and conceptual guidelines, I'm like, I don't know what you're talking about. But
that's a question, a great point, which plays in again to the whole consultation cycle. So, for example, we intend to share a phase 2 concept package with consulting parties as early as tomorrow, right? And so that's an opportunity for other consulting parties to weigh in a substantive way on those drawings. And the sooner we close that cycle, the sooner we can communicate and be responsive to the design team because they aren't so far in to the design drawings themselves. So that's like to describe. The sooner we get that feedback, means the sooner that we put it out there, that people have, that time span to comment, incorporate, meetings face-to-face or web meetings way through that process so that people that sincerely do want to be helpful and weigh in on it, it's got to be timely for us in order to meet the expectation. So absolutely, we want the input. I noticed that Cinder said there was some verbal discussion. I would really be interested and encourage everybody to utilize our website to put that discussion in words so that the other consulting parties are privy to issues that are being raised with that same window. We're doing our best to post up comments in real time so that everybody that's involved has an opportunity to hear where everybody's coming from and that we do our best, again, to stay on schedule, if not even make up some time.
It might also be helpful for, like you've explained now, there's the conceptual phase and the designs, I guess, that we're moving into. It might be helpful for people to understand kind of where we are in that. Since we're talking about timelines and things, it might be helpful for people to know, like, now we're in conceptual and this is what conceptual is. For people, like we're talking about, I'm also not an architect, have kind of an idea of what conceptual is, but I think if you have a better understanding of that, you might get a quicker response as well, And
I think, the next slide we get into, we were going to just introduce phase 2, which is currently in a conceptual phase. I think with the slides that we have to show, you'll get an idea of what we're talking about in terms of conceptual ideas. And, it's not going to be all sketchy. I mean, we are working in the age. People use computers, and they tend to kind of, put in real measurements, which is very helpful. But that doesn't mean it can't be changed.
It can also maybe try to on a visual document. You know, like with the first consult parties meeting, we had a list of terms to help decode some of the terminology that various people might not.
Not a bad idea.
Right.
Yeah.
So coming up with an infographic that explains what concept is relative to design, relative to construction.
I like that.
You know, maybe something we can, you know, try to put together. And then just thinking practically, you know, we want people tapping into the website on a regular basis. We develop a graphic that shows where each construction phase is relative to those three different stages of design.
Yeah.
Right. And we'll work on something like that so we can post, keep up on the website, and even as a good check-in. You know,
For us as well, I mean, just to know where things are. So.
Right.
right. So we can update that periodically so that people that are checking in that may not be able to keep up with every notice we send out can know where we stand, you know, even 12 months from now. You know?
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think that'd be something that would definitely set us up to really respond quickly, because thinking from a pure workload standpoint, like our office sees 2,700 projects a year. This is just one of them, and Jen has the unfortunate, since almost all of them involve some above ground, she touches probably 1,700 of them easily. So the better it is to understand exactly where we are in a project, what's happened, what comments have come in, the more maybe the easier time you're going to have commenting with all of those pieces of information. Yeah.
Wow. But yeah, I mean, I think that will just also impress upon people, like here we are, we're almost ending conceptual. Now's the time to get those kind of conceptual comments in. You know, it'll just help keep everybody on track a little better.
Right.
So.
Hi, this is Kelly. I just have a quick question. So I think it was you that mentioned that maybe that there would be other types of charrettes or things for other ways for people to comment on things. I'm just wondering what the process is for someone that's a resident in the neighborhood to view these things and comment on them. Is that through this Section 106 process, or is there going to be sort of a separate, you know, community-based charrette kind of a thing for residents to have an opportunity to comment?
Well, so the way I'm going to address that question is, you know, we're learning and innovating and ideating as we go. So through this consultation, what I hear you saying is less of a question and more of a suggestion, right? We don't have all of that laid out, but it has come up in previous discussions that, you know, like I'm very oriented towards Greater Russell and people that haven't been engaged in the last 2 years, right? We just did a neighborhood survey, and what we're finding is that people want to know what's going on, whether they live at Beecher, Terrace or not. They want to know what the time frame is. So we absolutely owe it to Russell residents to plan and be intentional about community-based, you know, charrettes or planning. Now, some of that's got to happen within limits, again, because of the financial and implementation complexities of the project, you know. But I think, you know, thinking about some of the neighborhood stakeholders, like the concerned passengers of Russell, you know, there's going to be an event, LCCC, that is focused on the balance between revitalization and gentrification. I'm on the presentation. I'm going to be giving people an update on what's happening in Russell, from Beecher to Greater Russell, you know, HUD-funded initiatives and locally funded initiatives. And this is really going to be the first opportunity we've had to give people a comprehensive overview of everything that's at play, right? And so, I'm thankful to the leadership from LCCC to set up the event, because people are talking about these things on Facebook and social media, you know, and about the water cooler. So I want to be as transparent as possible, but, you know, we always know as, you know, folks, what people want to know, you know. So your suggestion, I take that very seriously. I encourage you to make the suggestion on our website, to do this document. Understand, it's an accountability measure, right? And it's saying, like a lot of people, for instance, to us, like we kind of already know or have all the best ideas. The same kind of remark came from the current pastors. They were like, what are you all gonna do to keep regular folks upbeat on it? And I was like, well, why don't you help us think about what we should be doing, where we should be doing it, when, what that looks like. You have the customer, and so you put it out there. I think we, collectively are going to try to accommodate that because we really want to get this right.
Great, thank you. I will make that comment.
Thank you so much.
Gina, I have a question real quick.
Yeah.
So earlier you were talking about the stages of the project, moving from stage 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, that there are all kinds of different funding mechanisms that you're going to use to get the overall project accomplished. So what is it ties all of these stages together? Is it the CNI grant?
So it's $29.5 million on $200 million worth of construction, right? And even with the $200 million that we're sizing this project, of our relationship with McCormick, Barron, Salazar, the developer, that's in the bucket relative to the total cost of rebuilding 300 units of housing, right? And with that, we're not building out the site 100% corner to corner. So the way we get the choice funding, it's a catalyst. We're bridging the 29 up to at least $200 million for the site and really for $600 million for the entire neighborhood. When people hear about these things, investment in other dollars tends to follow. I'm gonna come around, but like when you think about City View, is immediately. Can I go?
Yeah.
I just want to get people. Are you gonna?
Here, let me get this. I'll find it. Okay.
So Google Maps open.
Okay.
Department is immediately. It's. Yeah. So can you?
This is the worst mouse.
City View Apartments, I believe, is a 500-unit multifamily complex immediately south of the site, right? We're touching that, but I don't know if it's coincidence that they have just recently decided to do a $50 million upgrade.
Everything I'm shading in here, this is all City View.
Okay.
Yeah, they're about to spend $50 million.
This is
City View.
outside. This is Beecher.
So if you go north of our site, across Jefferson, those golden rooftops, that's another affordable housing development here in Green Apartments.
Right.
They're about to do a $30 million upgrade to
They reviewed that one.
Great.
Okay.
So focus, Marion is singularly focused on how to build back the units we are about to demolish. And we're only planning about 300 relative to the 700 there, so, lower the density and reduce the concentration of low-income families, right? So the way they do that, the way they approach that is, sometimes funding sources, available capital, which average up to that $200 million, dictates and the nature of the projects that you're doing. So, like I say, this first phase is senior housing. The next phase is going to be family housing, right? And so sometimes tax credits are more conducive to funding family housing, and tax-exempt bonds are more conducive to building senior housing. So they're the experts that are deciding which capital resources to go for. All that is also dictated by the market environment. So when tax reform happens, our ability to leverage from credit changes dramatically, which creates gaps. which again, ultimately, influences our ability to pay what we've promised.
Right.
That helps.
Well, I'm still sure what the undertaking is here.
So I thought that's where you were going,
Yeah.
is how did we decide what the undertaking
Right, because it's
was?
something that you have to lay out in the PA.
So I can maybe address that a little bit. Before we went into the neighborhood initiative, the actual implementation, we did a 2-year plan process through Choice Neighborhoods, of which we knew that we wanted to redevelop this public housing site. For instance, we redeveloped the Hope 6 site, that a concentration of poverty is, and the site and the way it was laid out was not the most healthy neighborhood. Applied for this, grant, we were given this planning. So we spent 2 years with outreach to the neighborhood, meeting with residents, meeting with stakeholders, meeting with the consulting parties, not consulting party, a coordinating committee, going through this whole process to inform what this would look like. And Jean has mentioned we don't have a full master of development. We do have a master plan for the site. It's just at this point not in detail. But that information said we want to redevelop the site. We want to break it up. We want to bring in mixed income. We want to bring in mixed use. We want to bring in family friendly. We want safe streets. We want green infrastructure. We want to recreate a park. That all informed, we are now working on developing.
Okay.
And went to HUD, and that's when we got the implementation money.
So in having a clear, bright line, I think if I understand where you're going, this is the huge swing from Hope 6 to Choice. The world-renowned affordable development, mixed income development, but walk across the street, brand new houses and buildings, and they build distressed properties there, right? Because it was singularly focused on the site. What complicates Choice Neighborhoods, the concept, is that we've got things going on the federally owned property. We need to test because this is federally owned property, but the HUD is financing or allowing us to utilize the same grant or some of the same grant resources for another set of what we call critical community improvement projects. Those were undergoing a Part 50 or separate Part 58 reviews because we were authorized to move forward on those. But those individual project undertakings undergo their own separate because they're off the footprint of Beecher proper, right? In terms of relation, just to build all of the affordable housing in low-income areas, people that have choices. So there's a 400-plus units that we finance from a different source that's coming from what we're viewing now. It's project-based vouchers. That's a different funding source outside of choice. Those are going to be bought. They're not going to be built with grant funds, but it's going to be operating subsidy that allows and subsidizes people to have a broader range of choices in other, areas. So if you go to our application, you're going to hear all these various things, this tentacles, we're trying to have like comprehensive effect, which complicates it when you're trying to put it in a box. Right.
So when you're trying to put it in the box of the undertaking, that first whereas clause in the programmatic agreement says the key elements that are in the Choice Neighborhood Initiative grant. And they're spelled out, they say, consists of the demolition of the 59 buildings that are there, redevelopment of the site over 6 phases in 7 years to yield 758 units, including some on-site, some off-site, and the multi-generational housing support as well as improved amenities and public infrastructure. That first whereas clause, which we're using to define the undertaking, literally comes right out of that Part 58.
Okay, so then the off-site stuff is part of the undertaking?
So the off-site, so where you're going with that, the off-site stuff is part of the Choice Neighborhood Initiative grant, right? It's part of that whole process. Off-site stuff, though, we know is dealt with in a separate mechanism. This is actually what we need to talk to Curtis about. The HUD deals with off-site housing using a different process than what's here. So in the programmatic agreement, that we are going to create a whereas clause immediately following this first clause. That is funny, I just exchanged a pile of emails about this afternoon. I'm totally on it. We will specify exactly how the 106 compliance for that off-site housing will take place.
Other things I just want to point out.
Can I just ask one thing? Does anybody else have, anybody else out there have any comments about that particular element of this? Because defining the undertaking is a critical element of this programmatic agreement.
Under CHP, and I'm just wondering, have you guys run this past HUD? Because I don't think this has handled it for other Choice Neighborhood implementation grants in the past.
Well, it's funny you would ask that, because I have participated on numerous calls with sides of HUD. There are some things that have specialized procedures related to choice that everyone at HUD is not necessarily well versed in. We started this whole process by consulting with Sandy Fry, who is regional environmental lead, but then we've also consulted with the Choice Neighborhoods program as well as the Choice Neighborhoods Historic Preserve staff. And so, I'm not gonna say that I'm confident that I got it all and I understand it all, because quite frankly, a lot of the questions that have been posed have posed from HUD staff that said how we're going to handle X, Y, or Z.
Jamie, can you share how other projects have dealt with this to the best of your knowledge?
It's all PA. Where that was submitted to HUD was the basis for the PEC agreement when they received the implementation grant. So
All the off-site housing?
That's correct.
And how do the off-site? How do they deal with effects in off-site housing that's not
identified?
It's because sometimes the housing didn't need to be built, and so it wouldn't have to undergo any additional Section 106 review. But for anything that was more project-based, that did come back to the larger group of consulting parties. So I'm just thrilled to hear that you've been talking with Sandy Fry. She's somebody I work with regularly in that region, and it's a fantastic resource and very, really consistent in Section 106 and HUD regulations. So I'm glad to hear she's kind of been involved in this as well. It was more just a question. That's how we dealt with it. I also recognize, looking at my calendar, it's probably been 4 years since the project that I'm thinking of in particular that we dealt with it that way. HUD may have changed some things internally since then. So
is that a Choice Neighborhood project or
Choice Neighborhood?
Okay.
Glad to hear you've been talking with
new construction,
and I'll take a look into it.
So we will. So I have a significant action item here that this is obviously something that we need to chase to the ground now to figure out whether or not how we deal with that site housing element of the project, and we will do it vigorously.
Okay, thank you.
Other specific questions, comments on the PA? I had the benefit of a conversation with the folks at KHC to run through some of their top-line preliminary concerns last week. They So about all,
I wrote it down.
I did. No, not only did I write it down.
Okay,
I
good.
for myself. So we talked about off-site housing. We talked about breaking, instead of calling this a 6 or 7 stage construction project, to basically call it multi-phased, so that we have a little bit more flexibility. And we actually had a very specific question for you, which is there's a whole section on emergency actions, which we were hoping that we could strike that from the programmatic agreement. You know, if you had any feedback on that, or if you felt it was important to keep an emergency action clause in there.
You're kind of giving me as a so I'm always erring on the side of ahead for disasters. Was there a specific or a rationale behind not including something for disasters or these situations?
See, I remember what I was saying on Friday, and also, I mean, we'll be following up with written comments about this anyway that may clarify that. But the way that the emergency procedures, do you have it handy just so I can look through it again?
As a matter of fact, I do.
Yeah. So one of the things that struck me about it was it seemed like it was more appropriate in, say, like the larger Louisville PA that deals with like hundreds of different undertakings. Because here, if there's an emergency that hits, say, I don't know, flooding happens in Beecher Terrace,
right.
These things are talking about a view, like emergency action. I mean, given the nature of this undertaking, what are you going to do, build Beecher Terrace quicker? That's why it didn't really seem to make that much sense to me, because most of these are going to be talking about, I don't know, repetitive flooding, the need to demo something that's a threat to health and safety. And if that was to happen here, those actions would fall under the larger Louisville PA, which will be executed soon, hopefully, based on last night. So that was my reading and my question behind it.
No, that makes sense, Nick. That is Nick, right?
Good job.
Okay.
Yes, it makes
I was
sense.
like,
It's definitely
Nick and I,
me. If it doesn't make sense to
I
somebody
think
else.
Nick and I have been on the phone just about like every week for like probably the past couple months and other projects. But anyway, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure I understood the rationale, and that does make sense. So I'm making a note of that to make sure that we follow through that. We don't make that comment for any subsequent revisions.
Awesome. So one other fabulous suggestions from I think it was from Nick, it must have been from Nick, was to take the stipulation related to routine maintenance at Baxter Park, to take that stipulation out of stipulations, put up, make a whereas clause that basically says that we will exempt routine maintenance at Baxter Park from the agreement, so that we don't slow them down, so we don't impinge on the ability of parks to maintain Baxter Park.
And to unpack that comment a little bit, during that call, that's when Gina, I think you were telling me that Parks does a lot of different routine maintenance right now on Baxter Square, and given how complicated this is, the tentacles, right? These routine maintenance actions are not associated with the undertaking. And by putting it in a way as it'd be clear that these things are not part of this, but one of the future stages that may impact Baxter Square Park will be part of this, be under review.
Exactly. Yep.
Does that make sense, or we need to unpack that a little bit more, or just digest?
Just me.
2 for 2 now.
2 for 2, awesome. So we also are going to create a timeline with goals and expectations, and you heard me express many of those things tonight, but we'll do that in a little bit more detail. One of the suggestions that we had, so you've heard Jed talk a lot about how the development process works here. And that development process, from concept design to construction to blueprints to, all of those different phases don't work super well in a 6 process of here's where we're going to stop everything and talk to all the consulting parties. And so one of the things that was suggested was that maybe we create quarterly meetings for the project so that everybody who's a consulting party can dial in every quarter, potentially on our WebEx, and Cynthia, I'll be gone by then. Cynthia will create a nice overview of here's where we are in the overall project, and hey, we're up on concept design for phase 5. You know, just be on the lookout, and when that actual concept design for phase 5 comes out, you adapt the consulting party meeting to be, you know, a opportunity for everybody to have input there. But that if we program in some type of quarterly check-in or whatever, however often the consulting parties like,
I was going to say, especially with the first phase 2, 3 is kind of back to back. Is quarterly often enough?
Probably not at the beginning.
I know that we'd be ready to go into a quarterly mode at the moment. We might need to get further in to future development. Like, you know, I was talking about keep people updated over the next 7 years. So I don't know that we'll really, you know, just thinking about scheduling and sort of cycle that we described and thinking about the schedules of the development team. I don't know that we'd be in a position to go into a quarterly meeting today. No.
You know what I would say? So I don't think that for the design team you need those quarterly meetings now. I think for your consulting parties, having that routine check-in would be helpful.
I'm thinking about the information.
Oh, you're saying you don't have enough information.
I think Gina's right about that.
Yeah.
And I think the quarterly meetings are a good idea, but we're going to need to make some decisions that happen sooner than quarterly.
Right.
So I think it would be like having the quarterly meeting starting whenever we're ready. And then in between then we're going to have to do some types of...
Yes, you have other work. And, yes.
I mean, in a perfect world, I'd love for us to come together and master plan, make hard decisions, stick to it, and then use the consulting parties to talk about those other tough questions.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but they kind of play out together, like, you know, the future of Baxter Community Center.
Right.
You know, we will consult on that. You know, we've got a lot of unpacking to do with that place. But that's going to be further down the road. That's not the immediate pressure because, like I said, we've already identified times for some of our early construction phases regarding finance.
Right.
So we're on somebody else's timetable now with that. It's not the case with Baxter yet.
Right.
You know.
And another key goal for Metro is to create predictability in the schedule, create a way so that the design team knows what to be expecting from consulting parties and vice versa. Consulting parties know what to be expecting from the design team. So again, those are major things that as we get comments back, we'll be focusing on finding ways to fine-tune that. The last really big suggestion that we had from the KHC was to modify the section on future stages of the project so we basically have 3 to 4 pages of the programmatic agreement that talk about how we will consult during future phases of the project. Once we get past stage 1, what will happen? And KHC's suggestion was to simplify that down pretty significantly and say that we would follow 36 CFR 800, basically the stipulations that are out there. So in the conversation in the unpacking of that conversation, there are definitely some timeline pieces out there that we would like to compress, and a lot of that has to do with how to get that input in sooner. So what our plan for that is to make shorter than what we have now, compress that 4 pages down a little bit so that it's not quite so detailed, but to be very clear about timelines and expectations with regard to, okay, here we will initiate that consultation. Here you can expect to have the finding, finding of effect or finding of no effect. Here's when you can expect the suggested mitigations, and that timeline is likely to be very short.
Well, I want to characterize it slightly differently. It's not contradictory, but, in my reading of the process when we follow the steps, the first meeting, like say if we're thinking about a series of meetings on a particular phase, The first meeting would be solely just to introduce the concept, right? Then we would have a whole comment on that. Then the second meeting, outside of the initial comment period, would be to talk about effects, right? And then a 30-day comment on that. And then there'd be a third meeting following the process to talk about mitigation. What we're going to do is really expedite and make the process efficient because there are all these known factors that we already know. So if it was possible, especially if we're getting upstream input and collaboration on concepts, that we, take it to the consulting parties and have a meeting, we want substance about not only do you understand the design, but the concerns about the design, and you feel like there's, adverse or indirect effects, and what do you think we should do about it? I see a reason why we can't have that type of substantive discussion when we meet the first time, because there's all these other accumulated facts we've already gathered. So that's really what I'm suggesting when I talk about a chance. It's like, let's have really meaningful, substantive discussion, and we can certainly do our best to make sure everybody's equipped in advance to come into the discussion feeling like they can really hold their own, and then wrap that up, because we've talked about everything soup to nuts, and a whole lot more we're not going to know because we've already hashed out so much on stage one. Does that make sense?
And the pressure in that situation is on Metro to provide all of the consulting parties that here's what the concept design looks like, right. Here's what we feel the finding of effect is, and here's what we've talked to previously as part of our ongoing process. Here's what we've talked about as mitigations. So let's all put that together as tightly as we can in a single gathering, and then really hash it out make that a very, so I'm using that 106 language to, grab your ideas there, really hash that out in the meeting, so then very quickly Metro can get to, okay, here's that letter of reconciliation for this next phase.
The letter and then the direction to the design team. Yeah. Both those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
We'll just have to see what it looks like. I think, like you're saying there about the first and second and third meetings, sort of how we've been treating it, like in parts. We'll have to see, is that too much for them to bite it off in one meeting, or, planning on just doing one meeting, or like doing more in one meeting?
More in one meeting. Mm-hmm. But then meeting in a more predictable, regular fashion, so that we're, fourth quarter, when having our quarterly meeting, we will have enough time to prepare for the meeting to know that when we make the agenda, we're going to tell people we're at this stage in phase one of construction. That'll be up for discussion. We're here on phase two, phase three, any new updates. We can better plan for all the information that's laid out or available at that time. So, and then, not to forget that our website is really exhaustive, and that, we're trying to be as transparent as we possibly can so that people can get their hands on right information. Yeah.
That sounds reasonable, as long as people have enough time to review it and make comments,
Mm-hmm.
and they don't feel like too much is being crammed into one meeting, but we'll test it out and see.
Right. And as we go along.
Yeah, exactly.
The other thing I thought was important, the concept of when we put something out for comment, that people have the option to decline.
Yep.
Which will close the window and give us some sign that we've heard from everybody who plans to, as opposed to letting it, run its course unnecessarily. Mm-hmm. It's another strategy for more consultation, I think. Sure.
So, Jamie, do you have any issues with that at all? If we have, all the known players, they've remained engaged, you have all the consulting parties, and they have a response, or in some cases, the consulting party replies just, I have no comment on this. See any issues with that? If it shortens the timeline, we get responses from everybody and move on it.
I don't think that would be a problem. I mean, I'm going to have to probably think about that a little bit more. I mean, my initial inclination is no, it wouldn't be a problem. I would rather have somebody tell me that they're not interested. I would rather have that in writing saying, you know, I don't need to consult on this phase, or I have no comments, or, you know, something to kind of close that loop rather than having to assume a non-objection. We all know what assumptions do. I would not have that happen, you know. So, you know, to the extent that people can at least say, I have no comment, I think that would be the more, I would encourage that approach more, but I will about that a little bit more. But again, my initial reaction is not a problem.
Right. The reasons that I suggested that is I have a little bit of heartburn shortening like a 30-day review period, because thinking about this document that it might be living, say, 7 years from now. Like I've been at the Heritage Council for 7 years, and we had 100% staff turnover. So say like in 5 years, like Chris is tenure track at Harvard and is similar, maybe Stanford or something, and we got a new person, and it was like, I've never heard of Beecher Terrace. They're going to need the time to catch up, and that's one of the reasons why I'm a little leery about committing to less than 30 days, because some of our predecessors committed some crazy stuff, and then they left.
Oh,
and
sure.
Like, oh, no. So.
Well, and you know, I guess that's why it's so important for everybody to then say if they're comfortable at this point. I mean, if people are comfortable with those time frames, I prefer to not adjust time frames so dramatically unless it's truly an emergency. You know, like there are a couple of programmatic agreements I work on right now that for an emergency, 2 days.
Right.
But because it's an emergency, people, you know, we've got rescue and salvage operations and debris removal, et cetera. You know, my concern is, like you just did out with potentially a 7-year kind of duration. Who knows what other consulting parties could pop up between now and then and decide that they would like to participate in a consultation for a phase or for a section of that project. So, you know, I'd like to kind of think about it a little bit more, but my initial reaction is the point of a PA, is to expedite and keep consultation moving forward. One of the big benefits of a PA. Right.
And I feel like the mechanisms of having that no comment reply and then having these meetings, that constant engagement, you'll get that quick turnaround without the dread timeline of all right, the clock's up. That is the goal. Nobody wants to say, sorry, your clock's up. Right. What everybody wants is that engagement. Right. So. Fantastic.
Like I said, I think it makes sense to me. I just, you know, again, thinking on the fly, and, you know, after I was going to say, I've been on a few phone calls today. You guys are my last one of the day. And so I'm kind of on overload, also starting to mix up programmatic agreements. So I apologize for that.
So I'm glad that we had the chance to talk last week, because it let us bring a lot of surface those with other folks. So, yeah. So any other questions or comments about the programmatic agreement? This is very helpful so that we can begin to think through how to make some revisions. And again, we look forward to those formal comments on April 6th. All right, well, 2 more slides. I'm going to let Gretchen drive here again.
And you can close that box. Just put there? Yes. Okay.
Yeah, so we talked about a little bit earlier, the idea here is this is just a sort of a teaser of what the conceptual phase 2 that we will be looking at. Gina mentioned this is going to go online tomorrow, and then we're going to have we are planning to have a meeting 2 weeks following that to go through it in more detail. But just to give you, orient you where phase 2 is, this the overall site plan and the blue boxes around. The he's stealing it from me here. Let me take it.
Think about it.
Yes, okay, there you go. There is phase 2. So this is on Jefferson Street. This will be the new Liberty on the south side of this site, and this is the Liberty Court that's going through the site. The actual layout of the houses here gives you an indication, but this is the site plan. This is not the actual layout, as we'll see in the next slide here. So this is the kind of the conceptual layout of that block that we just looked at. You're looking at with these 2s and 3s, those are indicating how many stories these buildings are going to be. These buildings along Jefferson, the 3-story, the larger buildings are going to be fronting that larger street. We're having kind of our 2 stories on the more intimate streets or in the 10th or 11th Street. And then on Liberty Court, we're having the 2 stories as well, more of an intimate setting on the smaller street. And then returning to those 3 stories along the bigger street of the block. I'm going to point out these buildings right here, while they're part of the plan, they would not be developed in phase 2. Those are set to be market rate home ownership. And so those will be built at a later stage. But they're in the site plan because the other reason why they're here is that these are considered, we're planning for these to be townhouses. They would be facing Baxter Square. So we're thinking that, home ownership and market rate, this is one of the more attractive areas of the site. Again, as we did in the others, we worked with different examples, inspirational pictures, other projects that we felt had qualities that we were looking for. Here, sort of a variation in facade material, but still a sort of a similarity. What we liked about these 2 is the kind of reference to those taller, thinner Italianates that we see in the neighborhood. A play on the windows, but also using materials in a creative way. This is kind of breaking up a larger building to make it feel like it's got, more character than just having a big, long facade. Beecher that we liked, and then also kind of these quieter streets, this feeling of being, walkable, active, safe, those kind of qualities. So this is what we work together with the design team. Oops. And that just gives you a little bit of a teaser of what we've been working with. These right here are the 2-story. I think this is a multi-family unit. So go in these doors and get to 1 or 2 units. But the idea is to kind of give them that kind of more intimate feel. I'm wrong. These are townhouses. So these doors this would be 1 unit. This is a larger corner unit, and then there's another unit. But this idea that we don't want it to look like just same house over and over again, that a kid running around on the street knows that he lives in the blue house or the brick house or, that kind of thing. This window detailing here, we worked a lot with them on that it's turning the corner. I don't have a side facade, but that gives it kind of an element. Oh, there you go. So that's kind of what something like that would look like. This right here is kind of an indication of what it might be looking like. And then over here, you're looking at one of our 3-story, and this is definitely multifamily. This would be the entrance, and you have different units on each floor. Now, these are pretty much mirrored, and we, were kind of adamant that we didn't want it to look completely mirrored, so that this side has been treated a little different than this side. Also, this side is a corner, whereas there's going to be another building over here, so the different treatment here than you on this side. But basically having similar units inside the building on either side of this kind of corridor. This streetscape here, I believe, would be along one of the courts. This might be court. And so this is where you're seeing your 2 stories. We add on these kind of pitched roofs and then also combining those with more of these slant roofs, kind of between contemporary and more traditional. We also played around with not having this pitched roof, and it really kind of felt more office-y and not really residential. So we've, working with that. But these are the kind of discussions that go on in the conceptual stage. As you can see, there's not very many details. You don't really know if that blue is going to be brick or if it's going to be siding. Those are things that we can iron out at a later stage. But this is looking to be more volumetric to get a character that we're looking for, and kind of the layout, how buildings work together. In this process, I think we had one where we had a 3-story building here, and we felt it dwarfed these buildings. So we said, that doesn't really kind of work. Let's go back to the 2-story. So there's some playing around and back and forth. And this is, folks from LMHA and Metro, and this is where we think that, you being in on that call could be helpful as well. So,
one of the things I like is the differences. You have sort of like the Victorian with the gables, and then you've got like the Italianate look helps to break up the entire, not everything looks the same. You have portions of the facade coming in and out. Those are some of the things I really like about it.
Look organic, like a urban neighborhood.
Right.
Look.
Yeah.
That, maybe the architects didn't necessarily build this, just like you would have. I mean, at the same time, you look at old Louisville, and my house, which is built in 1870, is identical to my neighbor's house built in 1870. So this log kind of home thing is no, new thing to 2018. There is definitely that, occurs. But kind of the feel we want. And a lot, we've been very insistent on details like balconies, front steps, doors on the street, bigger windows, pitched roofs, things that help give the neighborhood character.
And have some brackets there too, which in some cases actually not liked, but I think the way it's done here, it works because you have that other side that doesn't look at all temporary. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Again, we'll see this in more detail tomorrow, or just you'll see the whole layout of everything, and then we will go through all those in 2 weeks.
Okay.
What we're hoping for is sort of a week comment period of which people can come back with sort of feedback. But the meeting we'll have in 2 weeks, again, we're hoping for interaction, for comment, for engagement, so that's also a chance for people to weigh in and having that time to look at it beforehand. So that's as we know it. And in terms of conceptual, the next stage is when you've kind of, conceptually we're good with this, we like the layout, we like how the buildings work together, we like 2 stories to 3 stories, we like using the Victorian gables, juxtaposed with this more contemporary look. The design development stage is where you take this and the architects actually make sure they can make it happen. And you start putting things like siding, and you get your real measurements, and you start looking at how much the balconies are going to actually be. So the next set design documents are done, you're going to be seeing this in a lot more detail. You're going to have a lot more information behind everything. Right now, if we were to ask the architects, well, what's that siding, or what material are you using there, or how big are those windows, it's kind of just guessing. They're about
from the sidewalk,
right.
The corner. Yeah.
So this is what I mean. This is the stage where you can weigh in on things that you can't weigh in the design development. But once the design development is done and people are kind of signed off on it, then it goes into drawings. So later you go, and that's when you're actually producing the construction drawings that you're going to give to a developer who's going to build those and then be able to build them. The further you go off in the stage on towards this thing, the more expensive it is to make changes.
Right.
So this is where we want to be weighing in, and this is why we feel it's important to get people's comments here, because this is where it's easy to go, oh yeah, you don't like it green, well, we'll make it blue. You like these windows, okay, we'll switch those out. When you go all into CAD, and there's a lot of work in doing that, and they make changes,
It's a chain ripple effect.
It's
Right.
a change order, yeah. Yeah.
I've been there. I've been on
Yeah.
a bunch of projects, actually. It's like, you want to do what? And,
Yeah, I mean, then it's a change order, and then it's
Yeah,
expensive,
right.
and then you're taking that money out of the next phase, or putting a park in the middle, or, you know.
It's a difficult conversation.
Yep.
So, whereas now we can have a really productive conversation at this stage.
Yeah. And thanks for the opportunity to do that, too. Appreciate everybody's time.
Yeah. Cool. Well,
On the phone.
thanks. Do we have any questions or comments on the phone about the Phase 2 design elements here?
Nothing from me right now.
Cool. Presents the last slide in the deck for those of you that sat through the 48 slides of the archaeology meeting. We're way ahead of the game here. So, and therefore the conclusion to this meeting, we do everyone's time and the comments that we've received today. Please, those comments coming. And as you talk to people about the project, the most accessible place to make comments is that Vision Russell website. You can just click right to the website. It's very easy to find the place to make comments, particularly if other folks engage with you about the project and you know that they have something to say. We received a lot of great comments on the website about specific elements of the project. We've actually learned quite a bit about some of the historic properties, comments on the website. So please keep those comments coming. You have further including comments, Gina?
No, I think, the only, way that we could improve, this has been a very helpful meeting. Mm-hmm. I think the only improvement upon it would be actual residents engaged. So, whereas at the archaeology, we had at least 2 general member representatives of the general public. I don't know that we have any here now.
And we did have it in the earlier meeting, so I don't know if just people's schedules are difficult right now.
It's hard, when people are working, managing schedules, it's hard. This is my job, so I must carve out time.
Right.
But the same for everybody else. They're working, they have responsibilities. So that's my only, comment on, it's just like the whole point of this is doing for the people and the residents. Mm-hmm. So anybody that's on the line, the way to be an ambassador and give these updates to other people and send to them that, I shoot them a link so they can go to the website, or even if, you want to translate or interpret comments from people to us, things that you're hearing, because they don't have time, that's all appreciated and welcome. That's exactly, the spirit and intent of the process. And we do want to see this come full circle. Say thank you.
Yep.
Yeah, thank you.
Reviews on the WebEx for those who weren't in the previous meeting. Are you liking this format? Is it easy to use? Is it terrible?
Jamie, I think it's wonderful, but I appreciate it.
It's an improvement from the last meeting.
Yeah. Kelly or Ty, can you hear okay?
This worked fine for me. I thought it was functionally, it worked well. So yeah, I think it's a great option to have.
Okay, great.
All right, well, we will definitely keep using this as an option.
Yes.
All right, well, thank you very much. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
Bye-bye.
Good night, everybody.